everyone and welcome back. In today's video I'm going to be doing a mixed media colouring tutorial, and I'm going to be showing you how you can combine different supplies to create vibrant and textured colouring. So today's video is brought to you by Pentel, and I've teamed up with them to create this project, and they have supplied all the supplies that I'm going to be using in today's tutorial. So I'm going to be showing you how you can make these two colourful illustrations. This one is of the Goldfish Girl pirate, and then this other one of a sort of abstract butterfly background panel, and I'm going to be walking you through exactly how you can create those different colouring techniques. So the supplies you're going to need are coloured pencils and watercolour pencils. I'm using the packs of 24 by Pentel Arts. You can use whichever ones you like. I think if you're getting into this and you want to buy some for the first time, a pack of 24 is a good place to start because you have a wide colour selection, but not too many colours that you get overwhelmed by the choice. I'm also using the Aquash brushes in 3 different sizes, and these come together in a little set. They're perfect for watercolour painting because you can fill the little barrel with water, and that way you don't have to have lots of different containers full of water on your desk. You just need the brush, and I'll talk to you a bit more about how they work later, but I'm using 3 of them. I'm also using the colour brushes, and these are full of vivid, vibrant, slightly translucent colours. They're absolutely gorgeous, and to get them started you need to unscrew the top, take off the little red ring, screw the top back on again, and then just apply some gentle pressure. Just hold the barrel of the pen down for about 40 seconds or so. It depends on the pen, honestly, but just hold it down until you can see the ink flow through, and you can do so many things with these pens. They're really lovely. Then you also need an acrylic block for some of the techniques we're doing, and a waterproof fine liner or brush pen. For a brush pen, the Pentel Pocket Brush Pen is a waterproof ink. It's really nice. So you'll need the paper, and I'm using 300-gram watercolor paper, and I'm using a colouring page today. There'll be a full description of all the materials that I've used in the description box below the video, so you can go check it out if you're interested. But you'll need 300-gram watercolor paper with your own design or a colouring page printed on it, and make sure you use waterproof ink. So the first thing that I like to do when I have supplies is to test them out, and I like to, especially if I'm applying a new technique, I like to do some little colour swatches, some little test panels. So with the colour brushes, you can create lots of different watercolour effects. You can apply them directly to the paper. You can mix them together on the acrylic block, and this is where the acrylic block is really handy because you can just smoosh the colours onto the block, mix them together, water them down, create your own colours. With only 4 pens, you can create loads of different colours and lots of different techniques. One of my favourite techniques is to just put the colours randomly all over the block, spritz them with some water, and then just stamp the block directly down onto the paper. And you can create these really cool and very vibrant mixed media looking background panels, and you can do it within seconds. So it's really easy and really simple, and you can't mess it up. So it's one of my favourite techniques. With the watercolour pencils, you can apply them directly to the paper, and then just take the Aquash brush to move the colours about. And if you want a lighter pigment, or you just want a tiny bit of a pigment, you can actually take the Aquash brush and apply it directly to the tip of the pencil. With the coloured pencils, very similar. You just apply them directly to the paper, and it's always a good idea to do lots of colour swatches and to test out all the different pencils and pens and see how they work together before you apply them to your page. So I'm taping down my colouring page here. It's always a good idea to tape down your watercolour paper to help prevent it from bending, and I also want a nice white border all the way around it afterwards. So I've used masking tape to tape it down, and I'm starting with the watercolour pencil layer. And when I'm working with wet and dry media, I normally always start with the wet media first, because when you're adding coloured pencils to something, the paper needs to be bone dry. I mean, it needs to be completely dry, it can't be damp at all. So you want to apply all your wet media, then you want to leave it to dry it with a heat gun or hair dryer, or leave it to dry naturally. I'm using a heat gun today, and that way your pencils will not rip the paper up. If it's damp at all, the pencils can rip the paper, so it must be completely dry, and that's why I'm working with the wet media first. So the watercolour pencils, how I am applying them to the paper and how I approach colouring like this is I work with 3 colours. So with the skin tone, I took a dark brown, I took an orange, and I took a yellow, and I apply the darkest dark first. So I took the brown and I went under the chin, I went around the eyes, around the hairline, a little bit around the nose, and I put the dark brown everywhere in a light layer. You don't want to be too heavy-handed with these pencils, with watercolor pencils. I put a light layer in all the shadows. Then I took the orange pencil and I went back over the shadow area and then into the lighter area, and then I used the yellow over them all as well. So that way you're doing two things at the same time. You are creating new colours by sort of mixing them, and you're also making shadows and highlights. And that way, once you've got the layer of colour down, you can go in with the Aquash brush and blend the colours together and smooth them all out to create this instant watercolor effect. And I love using the watercolor pencils because it takes no time to blend colours, to mix colours, and to get shadow and shading and texture. It's really easy and quick. So if you don't have lots of time to do lots of colouring, but you also want to get a textured layered shadow effect, then using these sorts of the watercolor pencils is a really good and easy way of doing that. And when you're using the Aquash brush, you'll see me, I'm using the same brush and I'm putting it into lots of different colours. And the way that I'm cleaning that brush in between the black and the green areas, or the orange and the blue areas, is I'm using the acrylic block, and you just apply some pressure to the barrel of the paintbrush, and that kind of flushes the bristles with water, so you kind of flush the colour out of it. And I've also got a paper, not a paper towel, a towel to the side that I'm sort of dabbing my brush off on every now and then, or using it to pick up the paint. And when you're applying watercolor pencils, it's important not to apply too much pigment. So I often leave a lot of white. So for instance, in the hat's a good example. I put black around the outside, put some grey, and I always go over my darkest with the lighter shade as well, so the two colours will blend together. But I left a lot of that hat white because I used the Aquash brush to drag the grey into the white, and that way I created a much paler shade. So even if you only have a couple of pencils, you can create 4, 5, 6 different colours by just varying the how much pigment you put on the paper, and it's always best to do less pigment than more in this case. So then I'm just using the Aquash brush to do the background, and I squeezed it onto the acrylic block, watered it down a bit, and just painted it onto the background to create this lovely blue effect, blue sea-like background. And then I dried it, again, must be completely dry. Also remember to wipe the masking tape off. If you get paint on the masking tape, it can stay wet for a long time, so you want to make sure you wipe down your masking tape so you don't accidentally smear paint onto your lovely piece of colouring. And then I'm going in, I'm adding the details with the coloured pencils. Now, the 2 packs of Pentel pencils that I'm using here, the colours do go very well together. They're not identical between the packs, but they do complement each other. And the way that I add details is that I go back into my darkest darks and I add some extra colours, because sometimes with watercolour pencils, when they dry, they tend to dry a tiny bit lighter than they are when they're wet. So you can, of course, do many, many more layers than what I'm doing. I've done 1 layer of coloured pencils and 1 layer of watercolour pencils, and that's the kind of look that I'm going for. But you, of course, can do 2 or 3 layers of watercolour pencils, then go in with coloured pencils. One of the places that the coloured pencils are the most useful are for doing tiny details like in the hair. I'd spent a lot of time doing lines in the hair with the browns and yellows and even a black pencil to give her that slightly sort of muddy brown hair, and that created lots of individual strands that the watercolor pencils would have the watercolor would wash away. And I also used it to make details in the leaf and everything. So I go into the darkest and darken up my darks with the coloured pencils. I also go into the highlights, highlight them a little bit, and I use the coloured pencils to add lines and texture. Then it's pretty much done. The only thing I did add at the end there was some highlights with my white paint pen. That's entirely optional. I like the life it gives to the piece, but it's optional. You don't have to do it if you don't want to. So now we're moving on to working on the little background panel piece, and I'm using the acrylic block stamping method, and I'm just taking the 4 colours that I have here, and I'll put the colour names in the description box if you're interested, so you can go check them out. All the information is down below if you want more. and you can always ask a question because I'm happy to answer any questions as well. And I'm just smearing them all over the block, fairly randomly but consistently. So I'm making sure that I've got yellow all over it, green all over it, blue all over it, so there's not like a pile of one colour in one place. And then I stamped it. Then I took one of the Aquash brushes just to kind of blend the colours in a bit. Then I dried it, and it is important that the paper is completely dry as in between layers for this effect. Then I took the colours, added more colour in, and I'm just using the Aquash brushes in between to blend the colours together and to create sort of a watercolour effect. And the Aquash brushes work so well with all of the water-based supplies. They are very useful, and if you have limited desk space, they're also helpful because you don't have to have buckets of water, not buckets, but containers of water all over the place. It also limits, sometimes I've knocked a container over, and the Aquash brushes also limit the possibility of that. After I did the background, I went in and just did some doodling with a black pencil, and I used the colour brushes to colour in, and you can just do as much or as little as you want. There's no way you can muck it up. I added some butterflies, some vines, and it creates such a pretty background. And I might use this on a greetings card, I might use it in a scrapbook page or an art journal page. You could cut it up, use it as bookmarks, and they're so fun and easy to create, or you can just leave it and frame it as it is. I really like the abstract look. So you can create lots of different effects with these supplies, and I think it's very important to use all supplies to their advantage. All supplies have different strengths and weaknesses, and if you can combine them together and use them all to their advantage, you can create some really gorgeous looking effects. So anyway, I really hope this video was helpful, and if you have any questions, make sure you leave them down below in the comments and I'll do my best to answer them. And thank you, Pentel, for this opportunity and for sponsoring today's video. I hope you all have a wonderful week, and I will see you again next time.